You walk into a crowded room, you feel every eye lock onto you. A tiny stain on your collar suddenly feels like a giant neon sign flashing your deepest insecurities to a jury of total strangers who are silently preparing to judge your worth. You freeze completely. Why does your brain convince you that you are the main character in everybody else's story? The common answer is simple vanity. You assume you care too much. But the real psychological truth is far stranger and deeply rooted in the ancient mechanics of your survival across evolutionary history. Your mind plays a trick. How did an ancient survival mechanism turn a simple coffee stain into a profound psychological nightmare? In the year 2000, a prominent psychologist named Thomas Jilovich decided to investigate this exact modern paranoia. He gathered college students together. He forced these young participants to put on a highly embarrassing t-shirt featuring the giant face of singer Barry Manilow before walking into a room filled with their peers. The students felt utterly mortified. Can you imagine the intense anxiety of walking into a crowded room wearing something you find completely ridiculous? Jilovich asked the shirt-wearing students to estimate the percentage of peers who noticed their embarrassing attire. They guessed 50%. They were absolutely convinced that at least half of the crowded room had actively registered and judged their terrible fashion choice. The reality was shocking. Do you want to guess how many people actually looked up and recognized the shirt? Only 23% noticed. The vast majority ignored them. More than three-quarters of the students in the room were completely oblivious to the embarrassing clothing because they were focused elsewhere. The participants had doubled reality. What causes this massive disconnect between what you experience internally and what the world actually sees? Jilovich and his brilliant research colleague Victoria Medvec officially named this cognitive bias the spotlight effect. It is an egocentric illusion. Because you live your entire life from the absolute center of your own personal universe, you naturally assume your immediate experience is shared by everyone around you. You anchor to yourself. Why is it so difficult for your brain to detach from its own internal narrative? Your brain is a self-centered simulator. It processes every single piece of data. When you notice a tiny blemish on your skin, your nervous system amplifies that visual information until it dominates your entire waking consciousness. You project this feeling outward. How can your peers ignore something that feels so blindingly obvious and overwhelming to your own mind? Another researcher named Kenneth Savitsky took this compelling experiment into an even more intimate direction. He focused on internal anxiety. He tracked nervous public speakers who were totally convinced that their shaking hands and trembling voices gave away their inner panic to the entire audience. The speakers felt completely exposed. Did the audience actually perceive the extreme nervousness that the speakers felt sabotaging them from within? The audience barely noticed anything. They rated the speakers highly. The observers described the presenters as remarkably calm, perfectly collected, and completely professional despite the internal chaos occurring beneath the surface. Your storm is completely invisible. Why do you automatically assume that your private feelings are painted directly onto your face for others to read? Psychologists call this the illusion of transparency. It is another mental trap. You feel your heart racing so violently that you assume the physical vibrations must be radiating outward into the room for everyone to see. But your skin hides secrets. To find the evolutionary reason for this design, must you travel backward into the deep history of human survival. You must visit your ancient ancestors. Imagine the dangerous Pleistocene savannah. For more than 99% of human history, your predecessors lived in small nomadic tribes wandering the harsh landscapes where cooperation was mandatory. Group inclusion was absolute life. What happened to an individual ancestor who failed to maintain the approval of the tribe? Exile meant immediate physical death. A lonely human was helpless. Without the protection of the group, an isolated ancestor would quickly starve or become an easy meal for apex predators hunting in the dark. Reputation was a biological shield. Is it any wonder that your modern brain treats a minor social mistake like a literal life-or-death emergency? Your amygdala does not understand modern offices. It does not comprehend modern society. When you trip on a busy city sidewalk, this ancient alarm system fires exactly as if a predator were leaping from the bushes to kill you. The stress hormones flood you. Why does your biology respond to an awkward greeting with the same intensity as a physical attack? Your ancestors needed to track every glance. They analyzed every single expression. Missing a subtle cue from an angry tribal chief could result in immediate banishment from the warmth and safety of the communal campfire. Hypervigilance kept your lineage alive. But how does this prehistoric programming function when you are surrounded by thousands of complete strangers every single day? It malfunctions quite spectacularly. The modern world overloads your radar. You pass more unfamiliar faces on your morning commute than an ancient ancestor met during their entire lifetime on the planet. Your brain becomes overwhelmed. Can you see how your internal spotlight becomes exhausted when trying to manage your reputation in a massive sea of nameless faces? You walk through a crowded shopping mall. You feel a constant pressure. Your evolutionary programming tells you that every passerby is a critical member of your tribe who might judge and abandon you in the wilderness. This creates profound mental exhaustion. Why do you keep burning precious cognitive energy to impress people you will never see again in your life? Consider a simple bad hair day. You style your hair poorly. You spend the entire afternoon checking your reflection in every dark window and adjusting your clothing to hide the perceived defect from view. You feel completely naked. Does a single person standing in line behind you at the local coffee shop actually care about your appearance? They do not care at all. They are experiencing their own spotlight. That stranger is currently worrying about their own financial bills, their own upcoming career meeting, or their own embarrassing comment from last Tuesday. Everyone is the main character. How can someone judge your minor flaws when they are completely consumed by their own perceived imperfections? Thomas Gilovich demonstrated this exact truth clearly. He altered the experiment parameters. He asked participants to notice when another person changed out of a group setting or achieved a minor victory during a task. The observers missed everything. Why do we remain so blind to the actions of others while assuming they watch us with a microscope? You are trapped in an informational asymmetry. You possess too much data. You know exactly when your clothing was ironed, how your voice normally sounds, and how many hours of sleep you missed last night. The world lacks this context. How can you expect a stranger to notice a subtle change when they completely lack the baseline to compare it against? Psychologists call this the egocentric anchor. It is a default setting. When you experience a moment of intense embarrassment, your mind uses your internal state as the anchor point for estimating the external world. You adjust very insufficiently from there. Why does your brain struggle so heavily to imagine a perspective that does not revolve around your immediate feelings? Consider the concept of social friction. You fear minor friction constantly. You believe that a misplaced word or an awkward laugh will permanently alter how your colleagues view your intelligence and professional competence. But human memory is leaky. How long do you honestly think a coworker remembers your minor verbal stumble before returning to their own worries? They forget within 3 minutes. Their attention spans are short. The human brain is an efficiency machine that ruthlessly discards irrelevant background data to save precious metabolic energy for its own immediate problems. Your mistake is discarded data. Why do you keep preserving a memory that the rest of the world has already thrown away? This bias also affects your achievements. It distorts your positive moments. When you do something wonderful, you expect the entire room to break into spontaneous applause and remember your triumph for weeks to come. They miss that too. Does it comfort you or sadden you to realize that your successes are just as invisible as your failures? It should bring absolute comfort. It is a profound liberation. When you realize that the world is not watching you with a critical eye, the heavy burden of performance drops away completely. You can finally breathe deeply. What would you build if you knew that your initial clumsy attempts were completely shielded from public mockery? Think about your own daily observations. Try to remember yesterday clearly. Can you recall the exact shirt color of the cashier who handed you your groceries less than 24 hours ago? You almost certainly cannot recall. If you do not track the minor details of strangers, why do you assume they track yours? The spotlight effect distorts your memories. It rewrites your personal history. When you look back at a high school presentation, you vividly remember the exact second your voice cracked or your hand trembled. You believe everyone remembers it, but if you asked your old classmates today, would they even remember you standing at the front of that room? They would remember their own fears. They would recall their own pain. Your agonizing moment was just background noise in their own personal daytime drama of teenage survival and intense social anxiety. The memory belongs only to you. Why do you continue to punish yourself for historical events that everyone else has entirely erased from their minds? This psychological bias creates a heavy prison. It limits your authentic self. You choose safer clothing, speak less frequently in important meetings, and avoid trying new hobbies because you fear the immediate judgment of others. You play life small. Is it worth sacrificing your personal growth to appease an audience that is not actually paying attention to you? Social media amplifies the spotlight artificially. It builds a permanent stage. When you post an online photo, you receive instant metrics that quantify exactly how many people looked, liked, or commented. This supercharges your ancient paranoia. How can your brain relax when digital notifications constantly validate your deepest fear of being watched by the tribe? But social media is an illusion. It is a hall of mirrors. Every single person scrolling past your post is doing so while looking for validation of their own digital life. They glance and swipe immediately. Why do you measure your self-worth by the split-second attention spans of people who are ignoring their own reality? Consider your workplace environment. You sit in a conference room. You worry that your brief hesitation before answering a question makes you look incompetent to your manager and peers who are listening closely. The reality is completely different. Did your manager even notice your brief pause, or were they secretly checking their email under the table? They were distracted by their own duties. They were managing their own stress. The modern corporate workspace is a hotbed of competing anxieties where every single individual is desperately trying to look competent while hiding their own internal doubts. Everyone is playing a defensive game. Why do you assume you are the only person in the office who feels like an absolute imposter? This is called the imposter syndrome phenomenon. It feeds on the spotlight bias. Because you are fully aware of your own internal flaws but can only see the polished exterior of your coworkers, you assume you are uniquely deficient. You compare your blooper reel to their highlight reel. How can you build genuine self-confidence when you are constantly playing with a rigged deck of psychological cards? You must dismantle the rigged game. You must change the paradigm. The first step toward true psychological freedom is recognizing that everyone else is just as terrified, confused, and self-conscious as you are. They are wearing invisible Barry Manilow shirts. What changes in your daily behavior when you realize that the jury you fear is completely preoccupied with its own trial? You stop asking for permission. You start taking bold actions. You realize that your mistakes will be forgotten in a matter of minutes, leaving you entirely free to experiment, fail, and ultimately succeed on your own terms. The world is a magnificent playground. Why continue to treat this brief and beautiful life as an agonizing audition for an audience that isn't even watching? You can step into the shadows. You can find peace there. The freedom of being completely unnoticed is the greatest gift your evolutionary psychology can accidentally grant you in this loud modern era. The crowd is looking away. What would you attempt today if you fully accepted that nobody is tracking your failures? Your flaws are invisible cloaks. Your mistakes are quiet whispers. The stumble in your speech, the stain on your sleeve, and the awkward silence in your conversation are barely blips on the radar. The crowd is completely blind. How much energy will you save when you finally stop performing for an audience that does not exist? You could speak your mind clearly. You could dance without reservation. You could wear the ridiculous shirt, fail at the new skill, and laugh at your own clumsy steps without a single drop of shame. Freedom waits in the shadows. Why choose to live under a burning spotlight when the auditorium around you is completely dark? Let the spotlight burn out. Step off the imaginary stage. The people around you are not judges sitting in a courtroom waiting to pass a final sentence on your worth as a human. They are just travelers. Tonight, when you walk into a crowded room, remember that every eye is locked onto a spotlight of their own.